Let's start here. Bernie Sanders was removed from the ballot yesterday in New York. Now, after they removed him from the ballot, they immediately shut down that election in New York, meaning there is no New York primary or presidential election that is going to take place in New York that is just going to be given to Biden. Now, part of the reason for this came along the lines that, well, Bernie Sanders suspended his campaign and we have a pandemic afoot. So, we just need to accept that Joe Biden has won this race. Now, nobody asked for this, at least not in the sense of the DNC or Tom Perez or anyone like that. No one in the overt sense has asked for this. And Biden and Sanders supposedly came to some agreement or some arrangement where Sanders was going to be able to still accumulate delegates. Well, New York, for the most part, subverted that process and basically undercut Sanders on this front. Biden kept saying that Donald Trump was going to postpone the election in November, and then New York nixes it altogether. People are angry, and that is to put it mildly. I watched on social media as people were having breakdowns and fits and screaming and yelling, bitterness and rage all across the pages of social media. And to some degree, you can understand where these people are coming from. We, collective we, spent nearly $250 million in order to get Sanders in office. And that was just in the primary. That didn't even get to the main election. $250 million. In fact, it would have been more if you're weighed from the standpoint of the amount of time Sanders was in the primary this year than even last year. But it's not the cash. The cash may be a big part of it, especially from the standpoint of his viability as a candidate. But more than the cash, it has more to do with this notion that Sanders says things that they feel at a flesh-to-bone level. Meaning for the longest time, they've attached themselves to the Democratic Party, believing that the best you could get is a Bill Clinton or Obama or Hillary Clinton. And then you get Sanders, who is what Obama pretended to be when Obama ran in that race. Who, when he says healthcare is a human right, we feel that in a flesh-to-bone way. When he says we need to expand Social Security because human beings that spend the entirety of their life giving over their energies, their productive, their muscles and their brains into making society a better place. Yes, to make a wage, but also whatever talents they're given to society, that society should not ignore them when they get older and can no longer provide for themselves. Yes, we should expand for Social Security. Our system should be reconfigured to focus on the interests of the poor and the middle class. It should not be a system for and bought by the rich. That's his basic point. And lefties believe that, feel that. We wake up in the morning and feel that. And it's kind of just base ideological way that this is right from a cosmic perspective. So finally, having somebody who you can vote for affirmatively as opposed to just voting in order to keep the Republican out, those are worlds apart. Especially when you get the chance where you realize, A, those policies are popular. B, the mainstream media and the political class, for the most part, just didn't want to have this conversation because from the standpoint of class, they weren't going to do anything for the lower class anyway. This guy is doing it. He's considered authentic. He's considered straightforward. He's considered somewhat of a straight shooter, relatively honest. Those things add to his charisma in the political space, especially from, I don't want to call it the cult of personality because I don't necessarily think it's a cult of personality. I think it's more so the cult of policy. These are the things we want. These are the things we want espoused in the world, and this is the guy that's going to give it to us. For perspective, let's hear Nancy Pelosi. Let's listen to how massively out of touch Pelosi is, and keep in mind, Pelosi has the House. Pelosi voted for these bills that went through, that Trump put through, and she could have put up something radically different in order to fight the Republicans' plan on this. Let's hear Pelosi.
As we go forward, let's see what works, what is operational and what needs other attention. Others have suggested a minimum income for a guaranteed income for people. Is that worthy of attention now? Perhaps so, because there are many more people than just in small business and hired by small business, as important as that is to the vitality of our economy, and other people who are not in the public sector.
Just to be clear, she owns the House. It's hers. If Nancy Pelosi wanted to put up a universal basic income, she could have did that, and she could have fought for that. When Trump put that idea out, Nancy Pelosi undercut the idea. And to put this that much more in perspective, you have millions. You have like 20-something million people without a job. Not to mention like 10 million people without health care. And she's No urgency in this process at all. Let's hear the difference. Let's hear Sanders use this crisis in order to make it that much more clear why we need universal health care. Let's hear the clip.
From an economic point of view, we're looking at some 26 million people who have already lost their jobs. If there is anything positive about this terrible pandemic and economic meltdown, is that it gives us the opportunity to take a look at the reality of American society, in a sense to, pull that Band-Aid off the scab and to see what really has been going on, something that many of us have been aware of, but I think a lot of people have not. So what you're seeing today is the reality that when people lose their jobs, they lose their health care. Oh my goodness. Who would have believed that? Who would have understood that?
Here's the catch.
That health care is now just a job benefit.
Right. Health care should be a human right. That's his basic point. Meaning one person is, maybe we should have a universal basic income for the 26 million people that lost their jobs and have no subsistence and are basically desperate. And the other person basically saying, yes, we need to have Medicare for all, and this makes the point that much more plain and that much more clear. Here's the catch, though. I've said before, my feelings for Sanders are complicated. What are you mad at about this? Let's be clear. This is only tokenism. Sanders is not going to get anything out of this process, even if he stayed in the New York primary. So while I appreciate why people are upset, this is one more slight, fair enough. But let's just be very clear. Sanders suspended his campaign. Sanders checked out of this race. Sanders never wanted to go after Biden. Sanders didn't make civil rights an issue, even when given the opportunity on the debate stage. He didn't make it an issue. Even when Joe Biden was caught lying in the 80s about civil rights, he wouldn't make it an issue. He could not make electability an issue, making the point that Clinton lost, Al Gore lost, John Kerry lost. And yes, Joe Biden is just the same creature that would lose because centrists tend to lose. He couldn't even make that basic argument, meaning the pointed basic arguments that Sanders needed to make, he was incapable of making. We needed him to go into a fight, and we realized he didn't even know karate. Basically, who are you mad at in this? Yes, I am with you in being aggravated at the Democratic Party and the way that they treated Sanders in this. By the same token, I have a certain degree of anger at Sanders on this that is, I have to be honest, not necessarily disassociated from Sanders' actions. You have to call Sanders' actions out. And I got to be honest, I'm sick of tokenism. I actually want the policy concessions. Bob, what do you think about this? I mean, look, I consider this tokenism. I mean, is there some reality to this that I'm missing?
No, I mean, I think Bernie Sanders has made it clear that, again, he doesn't want to fight and burn down the Democratic Party despite being told by other politicians that's what he was there to do. And he's made it clear that he doesn't want to be the Ralph Nader of George W. Bush and cause Bush like Trump again. And so I think at this point, Sanders is saying, look, we're in a health crisis. I'm only going to be able to do but so much. Our party is clearly much better than the alternative, Donald Trump. I mean, this country, you also have to remember, Jamarl, we're working in a transitional type of government here in the United States. This government doesn't do vast sweeps of transformation. This whole idea that Barack Obama was going to come in and transform the country is just not realistic. He never was there to do it. He was to do a slight transition from the right to the center right, or whatever you want to call it. And so to think Bernie Sanders was going to come in there and transform the system, even if he was able to get into office, he would have ran into the same roadblocks that Nancy Pelosi is pushing right now. I mean, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is one of 4 Democrats that even have or share some of the same ideas as Bernie Sanders. And one of those 4 of the squad endorsed Ayanna Pressley, endorsed Elizabeth Warren. So what would Sanders been able to have done? Obviously, the president comes with a great bully pulpit, but he may have been just kind of locked out of government action regardless, with a Congress that's more set on working together than transforming the country.
So that's interesting. Maybe. I mean, that's one of those things where you try to find out after you get in office, right? I mean, that can't necessarily stop your you trying to take power. It's a potential either way. I suppose he would have some level of opposition even within his own party. FDR did, even among Democrats. I would say this, though. Look, Sanders was the one who decided to suspend his campaign. And even if people, I understand that they think that he's going to come back and rescue them, kind of like Jesus rising from the grave, that's not going to happen. And not only is that not going to happen, even if he did get back into the race, what do you think he would do differently than he had done prior? Meaning, us keep saying, Sanders, you got to go after him. Sanders, you got to hit him. Sanders, you have to create contrast. He wouldn't listen to the people in his own team. He would listen to us. And so you want to get back into the race to do what? Not create contrast again?
Yeah.
I mean, come on.
Yeah, and to think, Jamarl, too, that he somehow would have been able to amass enough. He wouldn't have been able to ever amass enough delegates to win outright against Joe Biden after it was clear that Joe Biden was the presumptive nominee. So staying in the race is one thing. I know there's some people out there that were saying, well, if something happens to Joe Biden, I don't know, maybe there's rape allegations or some bad dealings he's had in Ukraine himself I don't know, something like that. Say that happened to come up, Jamarl. Who knows?
And that's fair.
But say that came up.
But he shouldn't have gotten out
People
the
were
race
saying.
then.
I don't think that would have necessarily led anywhere for Bernie Sanders, because the Democrats would have said, look, Sanders doesn't have enough. Let's let the process play itself out, which was so famous. And they would have taken it from him anyways. And so I think this idea of him staying in to potentially somehow be the forced candidate at a brokered convention if Biden collapses here over the next months, I don't think that was realistic either. I think there was no path for Bernie Sanders, at least from his perspective, but we can continue to debate that over the next hour and some change here on Political Misfits.